properly.
Well, I'm old enough to remember the first time when a company proudly announced to me that they're customer-centric. I was like, well, what were you before? We didn't get before. Now we thought, hold on a sec.
Lunch-centric.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Sorry it's been so long since the last one, but Pierre, as I said before, had better things to do. But now you're back, Pierre. Are you happy to be back?
Yes, I'm a little sleepy though.
Yes, well, I can imagine. Now everyone's wondering what the hell's he been up to. Okay, and...
Hasn't been in an opium den for 3 weeks.
Yeah, well, quite, exactly.
Has not been in an opium den.
This is a new Informer thing. They give us an opium den sabbatical. Everyone gets a couple of weeks to get off their tits.
Yeah. we were talking about opium dens earlier in the week.
Weren't we?
Well, I was when we went out for dinner in Amsterdam.
Okay, I bet you were. Well, we're going to get onto that. We can see what depravity you got up to in Amsterdam. So, almost redundantly, I will say that I'm in a light reading sandwich once more this week. I've got Iain and Ray from Light Reading here.
That's a
You've already heard from.
What kind of filling,
and oh God, what order do I do it here? Do I do the if you're watching first, or do I do the?
Now you can do it now.
Doesn't it matter?
It doesn't matter.
Okay, well I'll do the if you're watching. So just to remind you, if you're watching it on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can listen to it on SoundCloud or on iTunes or on countless other podcasting platforms.
Like riding a bike. Nice.
There we go. One other little bit of self-interest I'm going to do before I get into it is to talk about a new event that Telecoms.com is doing called Telecoms.com Live. Which is
the first live event for Telecoms.com.
First, thank you very much. So thank you for getting me back on message, Ray. And it is, as the name implies, a live event, i.e. us up on stage, me and Jamie primarily, although I hope you guys will be there sort of cheering along, or at least one of you. I'm kind of counting on one of you to be one of the people in the crowd where we go, any questions, and there aren't any. And you go, yes, I've got one. Anyway.
We're with a strong regional accent.
Yes, that'll do.
I can do that.
Exactly. Ask me a question about Brexit or something like that. Why or why? Anyway. Yes, it's a live event where we're going to be up on stage, me and Jamie, and we're going to be interviewing people from operators chatting about the latest hot topics in telecoms in the UK and globally. And we're also going to have panel sessions. And the whole point of it is to bring this vibe that we got here in the podcast environment to a live environment. It's going to be Chatham House rules, which means that we're not going to report on it, so hopefully everyone will feel nice and uninhibited about just talking shop. And actually part of it's inspired by a light reading event of Fair Play where it's going to come up in December, which is 2020 Vision, is that what you call it?
Yeah.
Executive Summit.
Yeah.
And that was also Chatham House rules and does a very good job of getting a bunch of people in the room talking shop, and sometimes it can get nice and heated, can't it?
Yeah.
Which is what we want. So that's what we're trying to do, and the reason I'm mentioning it... Oh, yeah, I'm getting there.
But when is it, Scott? When is it?
Well, thanks for asking, Ray. It's on the 7th of November in the morning in Montcalm Hotel in Marble Arch, and you're all welcome. I mean, sign up, and we'll make sure we don't get sort of too many people. But anyone's listening
it's limited seats, isn't it? So
it is
if people want to go, they need to get a...
But yeah, go on the Telecoms.com website, find the bit that talks about Telecoms.com live and register, and it'd be great to see you there.
And it's a half-day event, isn't it? Because later on in the day, it's the...
We've got the awards. Exactly.
So but what awards, Scott?
Well, thanks for asking, Pierre. The awards are where we celebrate... Anyway, you know what the awards are.
No, but what are they called?
They're called the Glotel Awards. Sorry, I didn't have a spiel ready for the awards. Everyone's just putting words into my mouth now. But yes,
that's all we got time for.
It's our 7th year of those, I think. And they're very good, independently judged, unlike some other awards that I won't mention. And they're...
He's not talking about the light reading.
No.
Leading lights there, of course.
They're obviously impeccable.
How many plugs is that total? Also brought to you by Guns N' Roses.
Yeah. Next week, I'm just going to get a T-shirt with a big picture of a plug on it.
Oh, good idea.
That'll be good, wouldn't it? So that's all on the 7th in Marble Arch. So do come along to both if you fancy it. It'd be great to see you. Okay, enough of that. Oh, yeah, no, there's one more shout-out. I want to give a shout-out to ZT because I just went and had a very nice lunch with David and Lenita. We had grouse.
Ooh.
Now, that's not every day you have grouse. We had grouse and burgundy. So I told you I'd give you a shout-out. So thanks a lot, you two. It's great to meet you.
Was it,
David
was
and
it a
Lenita.
continental grouse or...?
It was just standard grouse, as far as I can tell. Not that fancy grouse that you get in some places.
When you say grouse, I thought you meant famous grouse.
No, it was anonymous grouse.
Oh my God.
Okay, right, God. Right, should we get on with the goddamn podcast? What we're going to talk about this week, we are going to talk about quarterlies. We've had Ericsson and Huawei announce their Q3 numbers, so we'll talk about that. Both of you two were out in Amsterdam, as we already touched upon, and in between hedonistic binges, you actually managed to go to Broadband World Forum.
We did actually have a couple of hedonistic
Did you?
binges.
Excellent.
Very unlike me, I must say.
Yeah, right.
Found a good gin bar.
Did
Yes.
you?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to hearing all
Bar
about that.
Named
Jones.
after someone from Light Reading.
Yeah.
Jones.
Yeah.
Right. God, has he ever been there?
To Amsterdam.
No,
I'm sure he's
to
been
Bar
to
Jones.
Amsterdam.
Oh, I don't know.
He's bound to have been to Amsterdam.
I can imagine that going horribly wrong.
No, horribly right.
Well, yes, there is that.
Yeah.
It's such a fine line, isn't it? So we're going to talk about that. That's Broadband World Forum. And then we might finish off by talking about Ian's new phone, if we haven't gone off too many tangents and we have time. So in the spirit of getting on with it, I'll get on with it. Quarterlies. So we had Huawei's, and they're doing really well. Something like 26% year-on-year revenue growth, which just seems huge.
Sounds right, yeah.
Yeah, well, so I'm not saying...
They've shipped a lot of modules. They keep sort of coming out with this module. I'm not sure.
Yeah, antenna modules. I actually had someone get in touch on LinkedIn going, you said 400,000, you're wrong, it's 40,000. And I went back to her and, look, mate, the press release says 400,000.
Well, they mean different things, though, don't they? When they come
Yeah,
out
well, I
with
think
these
that was
numbers.
one of his issues.
They keep changing between base stations and then modules, which
and then antenna
doesn't
units.
mean, and then antenna units, and they don't all mean the same thing.
Yeah.
So there's no consistency of.
Yes. Very often you have to read between the lines. I mean, Huawei is famous in the early days of its reports. Remember, it's not a listed company.
Yeah, exactly. And they even say themselves that these are unaudited numbers.
Yes. And, it's when it reported sales, this is going back a way, but those sales were actually the value of contracts signed in a year. So they weren't actually revenues, but of course, people who maybe weren't paying so much attention just reported it as revenues, but
Yeah.
they
Right.
weren't. So you really have to pay very close attention, and very often it's not apples versus apples.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And to be honest,
Mind you, you can get some of that for some
With
publicly
others.
listed companies.
Yeah.
You get that as well.
oh God, and sometimes
Yeah.
when you're sifting through, even like proper, supposedly doing it by the book, the language they use is so
Very much
evasive and
But
ambiguous.
Did they? Because I didn't. We did cover them, but it wasn't me that covered it, and I didn't look at the statements they put out in detail. Did they actually break things out at all in terms of which units are doing well and where the growth was coming
So
from, and
they
what the
They didn't
network-
subdivide revenue.
Right.
So they talk about these unit shipments both in the networking side, but as you say, is it base stations, is it antennas,
Because I remember half year it seemed that pretty much all the growth was coming from devices at the half year stage.
Yeah, well, I'll fire up the story. Yeah, well, the device is still doing really well. I think we're sort of on the verge of getting to a stage where this Android thing might kick in.
Yeah.
So, as I wrote a little while back, why would anyone buy an Android phone that's not full fat Android, which is what Huawei has been forced to make in the form of the, oh God, what was it called? The Mate 10 or something. I forget what they're. Anyway, I'm getting confused with the Samsung ones.
Well, they're coming out with their own thing too.
I should mention that Samsung. That's quite a cool little sub story. So they're still
In today's 2-hour podcast.
yeah, exactly. They're still shifting loads of them. They reckon they shifted like 60 odd million in
Right.
Q3, which is a hell of a lot, and again a year-on-year increase of about 25%. So that's where most of their revenue is coming from, and probably where most of their revenue growth is coming from. Because to get onto the Ericsson numbers, because there's a direct comparison to be made, they got 3% year-on-year growth, and they're going, that's pretty good. We're outgrowing the market.
Yeah, and 4 at the networks unit for Ericsson.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, outgrowing the market in terms of carrier network, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Carrier networks is up organically 4%. I think.
Well,
at
that's a little bit
Ericsson,
confusing because they're talking about a Deloro market sizing, yeah?
Yeah.
And Deloro has the market sized at 2% compound annual CAGR.
Yeah, over the next few years.
Yeah, but they've also sized the market at something like 5% for
This year.
2019.
Well, that's their forecast for the whole year, but I think
Yeah.
there's expectation that Q4 is going to be like a real belter.
Right, well, so at least 5% then. So the point is, the Ericsson's, and I've got to admit, I've got to hold my hands up. I didn't look into it as forensically as I should have before I published the story. But I reported it. I took it at face value. Yeah, all right, I'm only human, all right? Back off. I went, okay, fair enough. If the market's growing at 2% and they're growing at 3%, then they're outgrowing the market. Fair enough. I took it at face value. But
4%.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's the thing. Well, that's a good point because they were referring to this 2% number, which is possibly even less relevant because, as you say, you're talking about 4% with the Ericsson
4% with networks, because I think when they
Okay,
bundle in digital services and managed services, then it goes
then
down.
it goes down a bit because the rest of their divisions are relatively rubbish.
Well, they're growing. Managed services isn't.
but
It's
slower.
flat, but digital services is growing revenues. It's just not profitable.
But the ultimate point is that if the Delora numbers for the networking gear business is 5% for the year, then they're underperforming the market.
They are, but that's a full year 2019 projection by Deloro. So if there's like a massive amount of growth in Q4, then...
Well, it needs to be. I mean, if it's only at 2% now, and then Q4 is going to bring the whole year up to 5%, it needs to go mental in Q4, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Anyway, so I'm just not sure. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying that on further reflection, after I published it, when it's too late, I gave it some proper thought.
Well,
I thought, hold on a minute.
Deloro also says they're outgrowing the market.
Right. Okay.
Correctly,
Fair enough.
So
fair enough. Let's see how it goes. So, but if they're outgrowing the market at 3%, then what's Huawei doing at 24%?
But that's
Well, that's
24% for its
24% for the
entire
whole-
business.
yeah.
Quite. So we've got to assume that's almost entirely driven by the smartphones.
Well, that's how it looked at the half-year point. It looked like all the growth was from devices, and it looked like sort of trying to figure out from what they gave you, that enterprise and networks were basically flat.
Yeah.
Was my rough sort of back of the match
Which
box
for
segment,
Deloro's market sizing to be right has to be accurate, because if their networks business is growing sort of really quickly, then presumably the whole market's bigger than 2 or 3% growth, isn't it? Given that they're the biggest vendor in that market. Anyway, all gets a bit confusing. Stats: 75% of statistics are made up.
Yeah.
I think it's 83.
Sorry, what are you going to say?
No, I was going to say they are still doing well. I think, obviously, aren't they? On the whole sort of fear that US measures against them and sanctions on components and things like that would cause massive disruption for the networks business has not sort of
hasn't manifested itself yet. That's for sure.
They're still obviously in a lot of carrier networks. You know, there's very few countries that have imposed restrictions. Very few
including
operators
Germany,
that have said,
which went.
That's news about that this week. Yeah,
we're going to be mellow about it.
So there's still not a lot of kind of pushback considering what's going on.
100%. I mean, that was my conclusion when I wrote it up, was that maybe the Americans don't have quite as much clout as they thought.
Yeah.
If Huawei's still doing all right. I mean, one important caveat to point out, for example, comparing it to ZTE, the sanctions they put on ZTE were much more severe than this entity list that Huawei's on. You know, this was a total import-export, something like. It was much more severe ban on their trading.
It was, but I think ZTE was also a lot more dependent on its US supply chain than Huawei is. They didn't have things like high silicon sort of doing fairly advanced stuff, and they just
Have we seen the operating system yet? Like the Huawei?
Not to actually play with.
No. But have they shown it?
I'm confused about what their operating system is.
I don't think they've shown it in the wild. It'll be an Android fork. So, I mean, I remember way back, like 2 jobs ago, Acer tried this. And more recently, about 4 or 5 years ago, Amazon tried this with the Fire Phone. Basically, anyone can get hold of the source code of Android, and you can do your own version of it, but you can't have all the Google goodies. That's the string they attach. That's how they exert control over the ecosystem. And so you can have something where the UI is really nice. Plenty of people have their own UI. Samsung's got their own UI. Huawei's already got their own UI over normal Android when they're allowed to have it. But so you have something that's got a nice UI and has got the touch, has got the experience of Android, but then you go, where are all the apps? That's basically.
Like you don't have the Android messages system and.
I mean, it's first and foremost access to the apps. It's access to Google apps. Obviously, like things like Gmail, Google Maps are pretty important apps, and then it's access to the Play Store. Full stop.
So then it owns the Huawei store.
Yeah, you have to create your own store.
Wow.
With your own versions of apps.
Yeah.
So then you've got to try and create the developer ecosystem, convince the developer ecosystem to develop apps just for you. And most of them can't be bothered because it's not worth it.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of hassle. But yes, my feeling is I agree with you. They're a good solid month, and as with every other media, in spite of US sanctions, sometimes you look at all the headlines and you realise, God, my headline's the same as everyone else's. But that's the obvious story. I still think we're all waiting, aren't we, for that month where the obvious headline's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Now it's all going Pete Tong.
Which will probably
that's what I'll put in
come
my
from.
headline, Ray. I promise you, I'll put Pete Tong in my headline.
Please do.
Which will probably come from the devices side, I'm guessing, when that happens, because if that's the thing that's powering them along, then that's what's going to.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
put the brakes on.
I haven't really invited Ray in, so I'll invite you in a sec. My feeling is that without the US, without Australia, without one or two other US allies, Huawei can still do just fine with China, pretty much the whole of APAC, except US allies, sort of Japan, Korea, Australasia, all of Africa, Middle East, half of Europe. Probably, I don't know what they're like in Latin America, but my feeling is that on the networking side, Huawei's going to be all right. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, on the networking side, I think they'll be fine. But I think, the networking sector has almost reached a plateau anyway, even with 5G. What's traditionally looked at as the communications networking sector is not going to have double-digit growth for the entire sector, probably again ever.
Right.
So the big growth is in other areas. So they'll still do fine. If you look at where the potential growth could come from, it's going to be from developing regions, APAC, Latin America, Africa, and they have a good foothold in those areas.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So they'll be all right, but so we're all kind of keeping an eye out for the phone side of it.
Yeah. And I'm sure that in time, these companies will diversify further into other areas that will provide some kind of growth. So it's very much of the now. But I mean, definitely the smartphones, and we'll get back to some of the, why people might buy one phone over another if we get to talk about Ian's new phone later.
I'll especially make time for it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the key, it was really interesting. Ian just wrote a story there for light reading, looking at Ericsson's market share over the course of the last, I think it was about 6 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you can really see the impact that Huawei had on Ericsson as the company that used to be, the mobile network infrastructure leader. And, they might be growing now, but they're nowhere near the market share they were in 2011, 2012. So.
Yeah.
Is that
like
DeLorean numbers?
Yeah, so it's like a big dipper, and then it's a slow climb in the last few.
So when was the precipitous decline? What years?
2011, 2012 is when it really started.
And then after that,
and then it carried on for a while, and then 2015, 16.
So what happened then? Do we know? Is it just Huawei getting their together then, or what?
Well, during that period between 2011 and 20.
Yeah.
Well, I think Huawei was then sort of on the ascendant,
really
wasn't
ramping.
it? Being competitive on prices, and everybody always said at first, they're just basically copycats, but they kind of showed themselves to be kind of real innovators in that period, I think.
Right.
And that's when people started talking about their technology being seriously good, and Ericsson lost a lot of focus, I think, because they started getting involved in other areas under some of the managers they had at the time. They bought more into the media side of things, didn't they? And
you're referring to the current Verizon CEO, Hans Vestberg, there. Yeah.
Yeah,
they did a lot of acquisitions.
He liked a bit of diversification, didn't he?
Yeah. But I mean,
going into cloud hardware and stuff, I think, weren't they as well? And things
not many people at the time said, "Oh, you really shouldn't be doing that."
Yeah, I'm not saying that I would.
But diversification always looks good on PowerPoint, doesn't it?
It swings and roundabouts. They'll do it again. Every company will.
Yeah. No, like Cisco, we were always a classic example of someone who's quite cyclical in that. I remember my job again about 10 years ago. I remember Cisco just buying everything. They're buying into sort of consumer routers. They even bought into video, like web cameras.
Yeah, that was John Chambers' little, that was his little personal thing almost. They pretty much sunk about 120 million into that little video device that just
pointless.
Yeah. But I mean, they were buying a company about every other week, going back 6 or 7 years. But then they had the machinery, the operational machinery to do it. They literally bought a company, integrated it within an incredibly short amount of time. It was something like 2 or 3 months max, and then basically spat out the old brands, spat out the people they didn't need.
Right.
And
So it's
you know,
very
they're
efficient.
buying an incredibly efficient M&A machine, which very few other companies have been able to replicate.
Yeah. Anyway,
Mentioning, I wasn't making any implications there.
It's a good lull.
all right. Was
I was just going to say, I think Ekholm, the latest CEO at Ericsson, has done a pretty good job of kind of, because I was
steadying the
quite
ship.
sceptical whether he'd be able to
Yeah,
steady
we all
the
were,
ship
Yeah.
when he came in, 3 years ago, and I think he's done.
Yeah.
I wrote a couple of sceptical articles, but actually
too.
I think he's done a good job of getting it back on, focusing on what it always did, originally, and tightening things up. I mean, they've still got some issues, obviously, and there's this horrible corruption charge hanging over their heads, which was something that happened a really long time ago,
Yeah.
which isn't
Oh,
gonna
that's
help.
true. Yeah,
But,
and we should note that obviously
that was
hit
previous management,
That
but-
hit the profit on there.
Yeah.
But it's a one-off.
yeah, and the share price went up quite a lot. I
Yeah,
think,
about
this week, didn't
7%
it?
when
Yeah.
I was writing it.
So that's
Yeah.
all been factored in, because they warned about that a few weeks ago, didn't they? The corruption charges.
I know, it's funny. I remember writing up Ekholm, but I'd never met him. I didn't know anything about him. I was sort of judging him by his initial speeches and maybe even his portrait. And just going, he's a bit boring, isn't he? And then, two things. Firstly, I've met him in person subsequently, and he's not boring. He's
Yeah.
quite a good laugh.
Yeah.
And secondly, actually boring in terms of getting the job done is what was required. So I'll be contrite on both counts. Bore you, as if you ever listen to this.
And maybe it was good that because he came in and was saying, I'm a rookie, I don't know anything about telecom. Maybe it was good that they had someone who...
He played
did
himself
come
down a
out
bit,
and
didn't he?
Did play himself down, but he came in not knowing anything about it, and then,
He's a very
it's good to have
straightforward, pragmatic person. I think, is an honest business person. I think that has brought a lot of benefit to Ericsson, I would say.
Yeah. Cool. All right, we better move it along because we've got lots of stuff we want to cover.
I need to go in for dinner soon, I think.
Yeah. Broadband World Forum. I wasn't there. You guys were. Who wants to start? Iain? Ray?
Ian.
Iain. Ray's pulled rank. What's going on? How was it for you?
Well, one thing I was going to talk about was, because whenever I go to the Broadband World Forum, one company that I always meet and then don't see for the rest of the year, because based on where they are in the world, is NBN, which is the Australian National Broadband Network. So that there's the state-backed.
It's got to be lowercase.
What, NBN?
Yeah.
I think they go uppercase.
Oh, did they go uppercase
Yeah.
now? I thought it was one of those lowercase.
More
No,
aggressive.
they're not trendy enough for that.
No.
Infrastructure
right.
and everything.
He thinks I'm right. Well, it's just two. You're
I don't
outvoted,
know.
mate.
It's like ZT,
But,
mention
back in your
ZT in
box.
lowercase.
But they're the guys who are building this big broadband wholesale network in Australia.
That's right, and
which
it's all
is state-backed, and it's a very high-profile project, because this idea of having the state come in and build a carrier-neutral network and then other people use it is sort of gets floated a lot in other markets.
They're a real
and-
stalwart of Broadband World Forum, aren't they?
And there's been a massive controversial project because it's sort of overrun the budget that was originally
shock horror.
allocated, and
It became a political football.
it's a political football. So
Borderline hot potato.
and then they're always at Broadband World Forum, usually I think meeting vendors and just
Yeah.
kind of meeting other people in the industry, and they send really senior executives over.
Yeah.
So it's normally someone fairly senior.
And they always encourage the media to give them a hard time because they want to show how accountable they are.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, which is good.
Yeah.
And I think they're a bit more up for that in Australia anyway, aren't they?
Right.
So, but they had the CEO there this time, and he was doing interviews with the media. So, and they've put this report out. So obviously completely sick of all these broadband rankings showing Australia doing really badly.
Oh, this is like global broadband
yeah, so
speed type
these
of
free
things.
speed tests, like Ookla's, I think one of the most prominent ones.
Yeah.
And I think earlier this year they put a ranking out that had Australia down in 59th place.
Right,
So
like-
it's behind countries like Paraguay and
below some utter backwater.
and obviously that's a reflection on the NBN because it's in charge of all the broadband
Yeah,
infrastructure.
doesn't reflect well
so
on them,
that
does it?
doesn't reflect well on them. So they've obviously got quite upset about this and decided the answer is to do their own broadband rankings that show them doing really, really well.
No one was more surprised than us.
So they commissioned this study from a company called Alpha Beta, which I'm not familiar with.
Right.
But they've, like Stephen Rue, who's the CEO, stood up on stage and he made a fairly good case for saying that a lot of the free speed tests that you look at aren't the methodology's a bit flawed. They kind of do random tests here and there, and there's no sort of agreement about how many tests you should do for a
Right.
good sample size
So
and
it's sort of
everything. So
apples and oranges thing.
yeah, they're very
according
apples
to
and
them.
oranges, and it just doesn't. The comparisons don't work. So they've tried to address that in the alpha beta test and do something that's more robust. But
Okay.
the problem is it's backed by NBN.
Yeah.
So if someone had just done that off their
You'd have to
off
be the
their
most
own
jaded
back,
hack
it
to
would
go,
have
hold on a
better.
minute.
And lo and behold, they're about 7th in the world. So we've all had them wrong all this time.
Excellent. And I gather they're from editing one of Jamie's pieces, they're on track. Is that right? To finish whatever
Well, they're
it
on
is?
track to finish the rollout in 2020, but
Right.
it's cost
A ton of
about
money.
40 billion Australian dollars. I think 40 to 50 billion Australian
And
dollars.
what is it? Is it like
And-
FTTP?
No, it's
everywhere?
not. So this is the other thing. When that idea
it's
was
a
first
mix, isn't
mooted, yeah, the original plan, I remember covering it a long, long time ago in a previous life. The original scheme under a former government was to have an FTTP network almost everywhere, about 90% of the network. And then I think they realised on a subsequent administration whereas you couldn't do that, just wouldn't be affordable. And it's hard enough to do it in a smaller country where it's more densely populated. So they had to sort of change the plans dramatically and use a mixture of technologies. But they've always been criticised afterwards for it being not future-proof, and there's a lot of reliance
Right.
on things like fibre to the curb and
Right.
cable
To the curb.
technologies,
Is the
satellite
curb better than the
figures in it.
cabinet or worse?
I mean, their
Cabinet's on the curb.
definition of
Cabinet's on the curb, isn't it? What's the difference then?
their
Same thing.
definitions are a bit different from everybody
Okay.
else's anyway. And they have quite a lot of FTTDP in the network, which is distribution points. So that's where GFast comes in. So you're getting a
Right.
little bit closer to the premise and then using this copper boosting technology over the last drop to the home. But it's still,
But if fibre's going to the curb or the cabinet, it means that there's a copper tail on the end of it, so it's not fibre to the premises, basically.
yeah.
And is that ultimately, I should know the answer to this, but it escapes me. Yeah, does that create a bottleneck such that it's massively diminished compared to fibre all the way to premise? I mean, just having just any bit of copper at all will really
Yeah, you're never
massively reduce the data rate.
Yeah, you're never going to get the equivalent of fibre, but then the costs are way less, and the time, the copper connection is already there to the homes and buildings, so it's a quicker and cheaper way of
Yeah.
doing it. But ultimately, at some point, that copper will
Got to do the big
need to be
switcheroo.
replaced. So yeah, it's always the trade-off. When do you go full fibre?
Yeah, and he was saying that because I said to him, well, what happens after 2020? Because he's talked a lot in his presentation about that's the end, that we're then cash flow positive and we can start thinking about, building revenues. And I said, well, does it? What do you mean it ends? Because presumably in future, a lot of these technologies aren't going to be good enough anymore. And he was saying, well, yeah, then we have to start thinking about evolving customer demands and look at what's coming along on the technology side.
Right.
Then. So it doesn't really end
Even
in
beyond
2020.
fibre?
No, because they're not. I mean, in terms of full fibre, everywhere
Yeah.
is not going to be full
Right,
fibre
right, I
everywhere. It's
see.
only going to be I think it's about 2 million properties will have full fibre out of 11.5 million
Right.
properties. And the rest is a mixture of fibre to the
Sorts of
curb,
stuff.
cable, satellite.
Fixed wireless
even-
access?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you'd think if some of the promises being made about 5G fixed wireless access are to be believed, then you'd think just go to the cabinet and then do fixed wireless access from the cabinet. Simple.
Yeah. Whether we believe those promises.
Yeah.
I mean,
Is
I
it
don't
not as
think-
simple as that, Raymond?
No, I mean
You had a sceptical look.
there will be a mix of all of these things, but fixed wireless access has its challenges from a business, operational, and deployment perspective. You pretty much need line of sight.
Yeah.
It's
And for it not to rain or be autumn.
It's impacted by environmental conditions. You have external CPE to get, there's a lot of things where it could go wrong, as with any technology, but there's a lot of instances where that is going to be the most sensible way to deliver a broadband service that's better than what is currently available to the people who would be using it. So I think in nearly every network in the world, you are going to end up with a mix of technologies that make the final connection to the user.
Yeah, fair enough.
Unless you're in Liechtenstein or Jersey or somewhere like that.
Yeah,
which you know a lot about.
Oh, in,
What's it like in Jersey?
well, in Jersey, they just mandated, it's only a tiny island, they just mandated that every place was going to get fibre whether people liked it or not,
Right.
and they just did it. But it's only 10 miles by 5 miles
Right.
island, so
But when you go back to the mother country, you get to live the fibre dream.
indeed.
Excellent.
And but because that fibre is then connected to a home router, and my laptop is connected to the home router, then it's restricted by the home router. And I'll get onto this in a minute.
That's like the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone.
Indeed,
Yeah. I wasn't going to ask you to start singing that.
you say potato.
Okay, well,
So, are you going to talk about the new bottleneck?
I wasn't. I can use that phrase if you want.
I've heard Orange come up with that in the past, that
Right.
because they've got so much fibre in France now.
Le nouveau bottleneck.
The nouveau
Bottleneck
bottleneck
nouveau.
is no longer the access network; it's the home and the capability
Yeah.
of technologies in the home.
Well, I think that's nothing new.
Yeah. Well, this is 2 years ago, actually. In fairness to them, when they
So is
started
that
talking
their
about
way of
the,
saying
the
rubbish
nouveau
router?
bottleneck, something like that. Yeah.
yeah, that narrative's been going for a while, hasn't it?
Has it?
Yeah.
I'll shut
Yeah.
up then.
Well, no, it's not. It's not that it's wrong, and it's just well trodden. I don't know if there's an answer to it. There's lots of talk about Wi-Fi 6 at the moment.
Yeah,
about how
yeah.
There is.
Yeah.
that's the dogs. It remains to be seen. Qualcomm's certainly big on that.
They're big on 5G as well, though, aren't they?
Well, yeah. Well, they just
They're
launched
big
some.
on, every company is big on every technology where if it takes off, they're going to make a lot of money.
Yeah,
Let's
funnily
face
enough.
it.
Funnily enough, yes, and Qualcomm's one of the more sort of overt in that respect. Is
Mm.
look, here's this, we made it, buy it, please.
Yeah.
It's a typical Qualcomm press release, which is fair enough. At least it's honest. Can't fault them.
Well, they do make good chips.
They do.
Yeah.
Don't start making
Just have lunch.
culinary puns. So bottleneck or whatever else you can do. What?
Okay, bottleneck and business cases then.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very noticeable for me that nearly all on the show floor at this event, I would guess at roughly 60% of the booths were companies flogging their smart home infrastructure, some kind of customer premises equipment or something that would help what goes on the other side of that fibre connection. And I think that's then reflective of what's going on in the industry, that the home is the in-building is the new battleground, and,
Right.
and that's where everybody's trying to make things better. And yeah, you can take a gigabit to the home, but if the
But you can't
in-home
make it
or
drink.
in-building infrastructure, that's right, you can lead a you can lead a horse to water, but a
let's mix
pencil
our
must be lead,
metaphors.
yeah. As Laurel Hardy would say. But yeah, so it's all about what happens on the other side of that home gateway or building gateway, because you could take a gigabit connection to a home, and if the Wi-Fi or the router is rubbish, you might only get 50 megabits or
Yeah.
less to a device. So there's a hell of a lot of work to be done there to improve what happens in the home, and then build a business around that. If you can sell as broadband customers say here, it's this much a month for this incredible connection, but we can help you have a secure home, use all these services, yada yada yada, for an extra so much per month. Then that's
You've
a
got to
really,
have the services that are.
you've got to have the
tempting enough.
services, and you also have to have the home gateway that will enable you to deliver that. And I think this is where the new battleground is coming in. What kind of capabilities can you get into this, whatever you call it, the home gateway, the CPE, the residential router?
Mhm.
Because at the moment, a lot of them are reasonably basic. A lot of the functionality is the same. But things like Wi-Fi 6 and also virtual network functions, being able to put a software-based firewall of the operator or the customer's choice onto that home gateway that has specific security functions, that could be a sort of something that will retain a customer and add revenues to an operator. And I think, but the key thing for me, key takeaway from this event for me was, every operator can pretty much deploy the same technology, roughly the same technologies, and get roughly the same functionality out of routers, out of their home gateways, etc. So how do you differentiate? If you've got 4 ISPs like hitting, the same part of London, apart from pricing, what else have you got to go with? And still, after all of these years, nobody has really hammered home and doubled down on delivering a great customer experience.
Yeah.
And it's been shown time and time again, if you actually put a lot of time and effort into that, into making your customers feel like they're getting a good service, they can contact you how they want, when they want, and get a good response. That is better than chopping £3 off per month or, having an incredible marketing wizzy campaign.
Jennifer Karikakis was saying.
Right. Well,
was saying
she's
that.
smart. She knows
Yeah.
what she's talking about, and she's
Former
absolutely
guest.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of this very
So-
pod.
And I think if you go back all the years, I think this is the classic example, especially here in the UK. If you go back and look at the launch of Virgin Mobile, which was almost 20 years ago now in the UK, and MVNO, they piggybacked on the T-Mobile UK network, which wasn't great, but they got better customer experience scores and better feedback from their customers than T-Mobile did, even though they
Right.
were on the same network. And why was that? Because everything they did was geared towards customer service.
Yes.
I bet it's similar now with GIFGAF and O2. I bet. I mean, I don't know that for a fact.
And it's all
but,
about it's all about
Yeah.
perception.
Yeah.
Even when they ask T-Mobile and Virgin Mobile customers, do you think you're getting a great data connection? Virgin Mobile scored better in these independent surveys, and their customers were on the same
Yeah.
network and
Yeah.
able to
Yeah,
get the
Jamie
same
often,
devices,
when
so-
we've spoken about O2 in the past, I think Jamie subscribes to O2 and he talks up the extra bits and bobs. They just announced their 5G
Yeah.
this week, and a
But
big part of it was the extras.
But he's also used GIFGAF, I think, in the past, hasn't
Yeah.
he? Because he lost his phone and went onto GIFGAF, which is owned by O2,
Yeah.
but it's a completely separate entity,
And it's an
and it has
O2
a real
MVNO.
good reputation
Yeah,
for
yeah.
being able to sort of do things like alter your tariff plan in the middle of the month, and it's very much like a sort of OTT model, and then you can just decide you don't want it anymore, and it's all
Yeah.
SIM only, I think, the way that would work, obviously, but.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that
sounds
that,
good.
but that remains true. That customer service play and
They have
Yeah.
weird
that's
zombie
another
adverts as
enduring
well.
narrative, isn't it?
Well, always.
Yeah.
But I mean, how many companies talk about that this is a great focus of theirs? They all do. How many actually plough some dollars and have a proper strategy that they then follow through? I would say not very many.
Oh God, I mean, I'm old enough
Or
to
do
remember.
it properly.
Well, I'm old enough to remember the first time when a company proudly announced to me that they're customer centric. I was like, well, what were you before? We didn't get before. Now we thought, hold on a sec.
Lunch centric. We're completely focused on lunch, but now actually we're going to think about you.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, and now of course, as usual, there was the normal, lots of talk as well at Broadband World Forum about broadband technologies, etc., and quite a lot of interest there. And Iain and I both saw presentations and demonstrations around disaggregated and software defined access networks, which is getting there slowly, and it is pretty interesting just from a technology point of view, and speeds and feeds and stuff, 10 gig broadband and beyond, etc. But like I said, once that's out there and available in the market, pretty much any network operator can deploy that, and the differentiation
Yeah.
is not really on the technology, I would say.
Yeah, and so the connected home, the smart home, has been around for a little while. We're aware of a few little bits and bobs you can do, but I'm certainly not aware of anyone who's made any kind of compelling proposition from an operator to a consumer. Here's a great digital home proposition for you.
On the sort of news front, I don't know if this came up in. Actually, we haven't had a pod for ages, so it won't have
No.
done. But BT had a big day at their headquarters that Jamie and I were both at. Lost track of when it was, but it was a few days ago when they unveiled these new tariffs. This kind of new converged offer where they've combined broadband and mobile.
Is that when they
TV.
launched their 5G as well?
They launched. That's the weird thing. They launched 5G for BT customers.
Right.
It's on the EE network.
Yeah.
Which is the kind of thing that makes you think, well, hang on a minute. There's still confusion between the brands. There's still.
And this is a big part of the customer experience. If people are confused, they are not going to buy your service.
Yeah.
Make it.
But the
nice
market's
and
responded
simple.
really well to that announcement. I'm kind of. The announcement. I mean, they're still a long way down, obviously, on where they were a few years ago, because they've had so many problems, and there's all these sort of issues with accounting problems they had in Italy, which started it all off. They've seem to have spent too much on content. There's more competition coming into the market. They've had some
They
regulatory
dropped all that
challenges.
cash on
So they've come down a
football
long
and
way,
stuff.
but they've gone back up a bit with this announcement.
Maybe
to me, I'm just
investors
not
were-
convinced.
Maybe
but-
investors were just pleased to see some kind of coherent vision from the new dude at all.
Yeah.
Something
Well,
other than him
was-
just standing up going, well, we'll keep plugging
It'd be
away.
interesting to see though over the next few months what impact this has, if anything, on subscriber numbers and whether it does sort of lead to any positive news for them. So
Cool. All right. Phones. Actually, before we ask you about your new phone, I just remembered that thing that I threatened to flag up, that other news story. It's just a little, almost a quirky, although it could end up being a big deal, which is the latest Samsung phones have got the fingerprint reader embedded in the screen. It uses
I read about that.
uses some kind of ultrasonic
so
stuff.
anyone's finger will do.
Mhm.
Well, quite, yeah. Some woman went and grasped them up to the Sun. So there's a story in the Sun, a picture of her looking forlorn with her phone, and basically I don't know whether it was before or after she bought this generic screen protector, but once the screen protector was put on, anyone's fingerprint will do, and the assumption seems to be that the screen protector is reading. Sorry, the fingerprint reader is reading the pattern of the screen protector rather than the fingerprints that are on top of it, which you'd figure, Samsung might have thought of that, as loads of people use.
Oh, you mean
screen protectors.
she had her fingerprint, then put a film over it?
Yeah, I don't
And
know if
then-
it was in that order, but
Right.
all I do know from the story is that when there is that film over it,
Yeah.
anyone can get into her phone, which is obviously not ideal. And so they said, it's just a software thing. We'll do an OTA software patch, and if it is just that, then fine. But if it isn't, if it's more than that, then they got to do another recall. We all remember the Note 7 blowing up in
Yeah.
people's pockets and
Or
stuff
on planes.
on planes.
And apparently they're having issues with the Fold again.
the foldy one's been a car crash from
No,
the start.
but yeah.
I could have told them that. Why don't these people
Apparently
pick up
you
the
can
phone
scratch
and
the
ask me
screen
before
with
they
the
make this
nail.
I
decision?
very briefly saw something in the last couple of days where somebody was showing how they could gain access, and I can't remember if it was to a phone or a laptop or something, but it was the fingerprint recognition, and they were gaining access by pressing a cherry tomato onto the fingerprint recognition. Did you see that?
Excellent. No, but it just
Or
sounds
did
like
I
a great
dream
story.
that? I don't know.
Yeah.
And suddenly
Anyway.
you've got all these shifty people going into Sainsbury's.
I
Going,
don't even have a
some cherry
fingerprint thing
tomatoes."
anymore.
Okay, well,
So-
there we are.
Yeah.
On that note, you've
Yeah.
got a new
It's a
phone.
good segue, that.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a
This
good
is my
segue.
new
You're such a pro.
iPhone 11.
iPhone 11, which you've sensibly got a case for.
Yeah.
Is it Jamie that never gets a case and then goes, oh no, it's smashed?
Yeah,
Yeah.
his one is all completely wrecked, but which is what I did to my last one, the 7.
That's it.
And
So
I was
you've
just
learnt.
gonna go SIM only and go with someone like giffgaff and enter that world.
Right. But then you thought-
But then I dropped my phone about 2 months before
And
an
it's just
upgrade offer was
properly
available. So I
knackered.
thought I'll get an iPhone 11. And I'm not that impressed, to be
No?
honest. And you'd
How
think
dare
that
you,
between
sir.
the 7 and the 11,
I think
think-
underwhelmed was the word you
underwhelmed.
used earlier.
Yeah.
You were going to be happy with just whelmed, but you haven't even reached that.
The thing is,
It's-
I'm wondering.
Oh,
like,
here he comes.
what,
It's an It's an intervention.
No, like I think it's interesting I want to know, like, what do you want?
Yeah.
What is it missing, basically?
What
It's
would it
just
meant
have
to
to
be
do?
impressed
it
by
doesn't do that
whelmed?
much more than the 7. It's not. There's no significant new features on it that are. I mean, it's a bigger phone.
Haven't you got that? You've got the razor on the back, yeah?
What
No,
for
Phil-
Jamie?
there's
Yeah.
only two. It's only two.
Oh, so
Um,
you only got 2? Oh.
No, and the camera is
True. Why has he
nowhere
only got
near
2
as good
holes?
because the iPhone Pro is the one with 3 holes,
Oh, right, okay.
which you have to spend a lot more money on.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, fair enough.
but this is an iPhone 11. And it should
Lenses,
be. I thought the camera would be much better than the 7, and it's not. Doesn't seem significantly
When you
better.
take a photo, you're not like,
Certainly-
oh my god, that's so
No,
much
and it's
better.
certainly not as good as a camera on Jamie's Huawei device.
No?
No.
And how are you doing that? Just looking at it?
So just taking a photo and enlarging it to see what happens with pixelation.
I see.
And this one's definitely blurry. And Pierre's going to give some explanation now. Of
No, I
what's
mean
happening.
Going
there's a reason
But-
why most cameras are 12 megapixel. It's because the size of the sensor is so small that if you cram more pixels into the sensor, the pixels have to be smaller.
yeah.
And when they're smaller, they're bad in low light.
Yeah. I remember that actually years ago, about 10 years
So it's
ago.
a trade.
HTC tried this back when HTC was still a sort of viable player. In
The 40 megapixel one. Yeah.
No, that was Nokia. They
Oh.
they went the other way. HTC came out with something that was only about 2 megapixels, but they're going, it's all right because each pixel's better. And no one bought it. I was like, nah. Because people, when they're buying technology, they tend to go on numerical stuff because most people don't understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And they go, well, 12 must be better than 10.
Yeah.
If you suddenly go, no, it's 2, but each one's better.
So
But
Then
I
then
think
like
they
this
have it.
camera here, for example, the sensor is about the size of, I don't know, like like 2 stems,
Yeah.
and it's also a 12 megapixel, even though your sensor is the size of like
Right.
a fingernail.
The trouble is, if you buy something that's, I mean, everybody talks about there's not that many new features in you can't shave with them or anything. So if they're not going to do things like that, then you at least expect the apps that
Actually
are on
get
there
the
to be
Pro.
significantly better.
The apps to be better.
Well, or the performance to be better. So for instance, battery life.
Well,
doesn't
the
seem to
performance
be
will be better.
significant.
It might not be immediately obvious, but the chip will be
I'm
a
still
whole
getting
ton
about
better
a
than the
day's
chip in your-
battery life.
Right.
And I still find, like for instance, if you're on a 4G network in a busy area,
Yeah.
it's still, I mean, that's a network issue, I guess. But I'm
And
just
a
thinking
modem
consumers
issue,
are going to go, well, it's not really working any faster, and it's a new phone.
Good job it was cheap then.
And the other thing is, I don't like the facial recognition thing either,
No?
because
Can you
what
unlock
I-
it with
what
a
I
cherry
te-
tomato?
well, I can't unlock it at all if I've got my glasses off. And I
No,
tend to use it
okay.
as an alarm, so it's next to me on the bed.
Imagine how
Okay,
insulting that would
wait.
be if
And-
it was facial recognition. You can unlock it with a cherry tomato.
Ian, there's a function that you have to turn off in the phone, and you can do that later.
What, without my glasses?
Yes.
Right, I'll have to do that then. Because I pick this up in the morning when the alarm goes off.
Yeah.
And one of the first
Actually,
things I do is
unlock it now.
check
Unlock
the
it now. I'll
news
do it
to
for
see
you.
what's going on.
Yeah.
And it won't... well, if I take my glasses off, it won't unlock.
Okay, now give it to me. I'll do it for you.
It only responds to handsome Frenchmen.
Oh my god. Okay, here we go.
Right. This is great
Well,
telly
you won't be able
right
to do it
now.
now because presumably you need to start with having it
let's
unlocked.
fill the vacuum. What phone have you got?
Well,
Have you got a
He's got an old
iPhone
phone.
1 or something?
Put your code in.
I haven't even got that.
No.
I have a legacy Samsung.
Right, and that's
Because-
fine. You,
Okay, now try it.
you feel no great.
I will be
Urgency.
upgrading soon, but I need to get
Actually,
off
turn
my
off
So-
the
back end
second
and do
thing
it.
too.
So back
Turn
to
that off.
Ian's underwhelmedness,
Yeah.
if that's a word. It is an enduring
Okay.
problem of smartphones. They matured as a form factor like so quickly, about 10 years ago. So we've got the black rectangle touchscreen form factor. No one wants flip. No one wants foldy phone. No one wants all these other slidey phones and all that stuff that used to be so exciting 20 years ago. And the user experience is uniform because it's either iOS or Android. Stop clicking.
Well, he's just
Making me
fixed.
tense.
He has just improved it immeasurably.
Oh, really?
Oh, so you
less,
went
I'm
on
less,
simple-
okay, well,
I'm
we
less
should-
underwhelmed.
We should get back on that. I was just
Yeah.
prattling to fill
Yeah.
Yeah.
the
What were you talking
vacuum while you
Apparently,
guys were
there's
sorting out.
some
What just happened?
There's some settings feature where you can press a button that says something about attention-aware features.
Yeah.
And if you click that off, then suddenly you don't have to wear glasses anymore.
You
You can
didn't-
take your
Also-
false teeth out.
You
Oh.
didn't read the brochure, did you?
Oh, you know what?
Brochure.
Funny thing though. Funny thing. If you're yawning, it doesn't work.
Right.
How do
Yeah.
you even know that?
Because it happened to me.
Strange. But we do have to do that with modern devices.
If you're
we don't
watching
get.
Man United play, it won't work.
I told you I've been sleepy for a while now.
Yes, well, indeed. But you don't get a brochure, as Ray so charmingly put it, with smartphones. So you have to go off. You have to go onto the internet. And
Yeah.
look for these solutions.
But you can't do that if the phone's not working. Unless
What,
you've
don't
got
you have a
PC.
computer?
Well, yeah, some people
Come on,
don't.
mate. You're not trying here. Meet us halfway. So yes, no, but I've done that all the time. Like I keep forgetting how to do a screenshot, for example, and I have to just go online and work out which combination.
Well,
of
I didn't know
buttons to
either
do a screenshot.
because they've got rid of the button.
Right.
That was the easy way to do a screenshot. With,
Right.
It's like
but I had to look it up.
Yeah.
Are you looking at your watch, right?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
So I think we've reached the 3-hour mark. So.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's all good. Thanks a lot, guys, and welcome back, Pierre.
thank you.
And thank you for listening. And don't forget about Telecoms.com Live and all the other plugs.
Oh,
and,
do we know what we're doing next week? Can we tease it or?
Yeah, sure. We're going to get William Webb in hopefully next week,
Mhm.
unless disaster befalls him.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be chatting.
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah. And we'll be chatting. I don't know what we're going to chat about, but he's strong on all kinds of stuff. But 5G, he's quite good at sort of slagging off 5G. So maybe that'll come up. So yeah, that's next week.
He'll be
William
here, God willing.
Webb. God willing, yes. So thank you for joining us, and make sure you join us for that one.